If you enjoy stories about cities, lost architecture, and the futures that might have been, subscribe to Arc Atlas Lab for more alternate histories, recreations of the past, and hypothetical urban projects. At the dawn of the 20th century, New York City stood on the edge of transformation. Railroads had bound the nation together, but Manhattan itself remained just out of reach. What followed would redefine how cities built for movement, scale, and ambition. When the Pennsylvania Railroad announced plans for a new terminal in Manhattan, it was more than an infrastructure project. It was a declaration, a commitment to place rail travel not at the margins of the city, but at its very heart. To arrive in New York would no longer mean slipping in unnoticed. It would mean entering through a civic gateway worthy of the metropolis itself. To shape this vision, the railroad turned to McKim, Mead White, the most influential architectural firm of the era. Their proposal rejected the purely utilitarian. Instead, they imagined a public monument rooted in classical precedent, yet unmistakably modern in its purpose. The design drew inspiration from ancient Rome, particularly the Baths of Caracalla and the Basilica of Maxentius, monumental spaces that use scale, symmetry, and light to elevate civic life. In drafting rooms illuminated by early electric light, blueprints spread across desks as Manhattan prepared for something unprecedented. Below ground, tunnels were driven beneath the Hudson and East Rivers. Above ground, a forest of steel rose block by block. Penn Station was not built quickly nor quietly. It was assembled as a feat of engineering and ambition, its massive trusses and stone walls announcing that New York had entered a new era. As construction neared completion, the scale of the undertaking became impossible to ignore. A building larger than many European cathedrals now occupied an entire city block. Its limestone colonnades stretched outward like open arms, inviting the public inside. This was not a terminal hidden underground or tucked behind offices. This was architecture meant to be seen. When Penn Station opened in 1910, it immediately redefined arrival. Passengers emerged into a concourse flooded with natural light, filtered through a vast steel and glass vault overhead. For many, it was their first experience of New York, and it was unforgettable. Unlike today's low, compressed platforms, Penn Station's tracks lay beneath soaring arches of glass. Trains arrived in daylight, steam mixed with sunlight. Movement through the station felt ceremonial rather than hurried. Even the act of boarding or disembarking carried a sense of importance. Passengers ascended broad stairways from the platforms into the concourse above. Commuters, families, and travelers flowed upward together. During wartime, sailors climbed those same stairs, uniforms pressed and duffel bags slung over their shoulders, passing beneath vaults that framed their journeys with dignity and gravity. Inside the station, lobbies unfolded like interior plazas. Coffered ceilings soared overhead. Arched windows poured light deep into the building, giving the space a quality closer to a cathedral than a terminal. This was architecture that treated the public not as crowds, but as citizens. Outside, Penn Station anchored the west side of Manhattan. At street level, it pulsed with life, taxis, pedestrians, storefronts, and movement in every direction. By day, it was a crossroads. By night, it glowed as a beacon. Its presence felt across the surrounding neighborhood. It was not merely a building the city passed through. It was part of the city's identity. Yet even monuments are shaped by forces beyond stone and steel. As decades passed, the world that had demanded such grandeur began to change. Travel patterns shifted, priorities evolved. And beneath Penn Station's luminous vaults, signs of strain quietly emerged. And then, almost imperceptibly, the mood began to change. By the mid-20th century, Penn Station was still monumental, still filled with light, but it was no longer being cared for as it once had been. Passenger rail travel was declining, and the Pennsylvania Railroad, was under growing financial strain. Maintenance slowed, repairs were deferred. The building aged faster than it should have. Passengers gathered beneath ceilings that remained vast, but no longer pristine. Stone darkened, surfaces dulled. The station still functioned, still moved millions, yet something essential had begun to erode. Light continued to pour into the great lobbies, but Penn Station struggled to reconcile its Beaux-Arts grandeur with a rapidly modernizing world. In the late 1950s, an attempt was made to update the space. A circular information canopy, known as the Information Rotunda, was installed beneath the classical vaults. It was intended to improve wayfinding and modernize an aging terminal. Instead, its low mid-century form clashed with the architecture above it. Rather than renewal, it signaled uncertainty. Behind closed doors, plans were already taking shape. Revenue began to outweigh civic purpose. Penn Station was increasingly seen not as a monument to be maintained, but as land to be repurposed. At the same time, a new idea was gaining momentum. Architects, planners, and citizens began to argue that buildings like Penn Station were not obstacles to progress, but irreplaceable public works. A preservation movement formed around the belief that the city's history had value, and that once lost, it could never be rebuilt. But the movement came too late. There were no legal protections in place, no landmarks law to shield the station from demolition. Despite protests and public outcry, the arguments for preservation were ultimately overpowered by economics and development pressure. Penn Station stood at a crossroads, still standing, still magnificent, and about to become the loss that would define an entire movement built in its wake. And then the moment arrived that many feared, and others refused to believe, would truly come. In October of 1963, demolition began. The first elements to be removed were not structural, but symbolic. The great stone eagles that once crowned Penn Station's entrances were lifted away, one by one. Designed as guardians of the terminal, they were among the first to leave it behind. Scaffolding soon wrapped the entrances, closing off spaces that had welcomed generations of travellers. What had once been open and ceremonial became sealed, temporary, and quiet. Inside the station, a strange overlap of eras unfolded. As parts of the old Penn Station were still standing, new steel began rising within its walls. The future was being assembled before the past had fully disappeared. The vaulted lobbies fell silent. Scaffolding filled spaces once defined by light and movement. Debris gathered where passengers had stood only months before. For a brief moment, the station felt suspended in time, emptied of purpose, waiting. Then the demolition accelerated. Excavation equipment moved into the great halls. Stone floors were broken apart. Coffered ceilings collapsed. Corinthian columns, once carved in solid stone, were stripped down to the steel hidden inside them. At that point, there was no turning back. The roof was open to the sky. Daylight poured in again, not through glass, but through absence. What had once been enclosed, protected, and monumental was now exposed and fragmented. From within the concourse, steel trusses stood amid piles of rubble. Through the broken structure, the Empire State Building appeared in the distance, unchanged, watching as Penn Station vanished beneath it. Penn Station was not demolished all at once. It was dismantled slowly, deliberately, piece by piece, and with it disappeared a way of building American cities that believed public space should inspire awe. From the ruins of Penn Station, a new era began. For a brief time, fragments of the old station still stood. At street level, the great stone facade remained in place, no longer enclosing space, but framing absence. Through its arches, steel rose behind it, forming the skeleton of a new Penn Station and Madison Square Garden. Past and future occupied the same frame, but no longer spoke the same language. Below ground, travellers were rerouted into a temporary station. The space was cramped, the ceiling low and tarped, light scarce. It was a far cry from the soaring glass and steel vaults that once defined arrival in New York. Yet in many ways, it was a preview. This was the experience the modernized complex would soon make permanent. From above, the contrast became even clearer. The monumental stone facade of Penn Station lingered at the edge of the site, while the steel structure of Madison Square Garden rose decisively behind it. The city was not pausing to reflect. It was moving forward. Soon, even those remaining fragments disappeared. With the original station fully removed, the arena's steel frame dominated the site. Its circular form announced a new priority for the block: entertainment, efficiency, and revenue rather than civic arrival. This was progress, according to the language of the time. Streamlined, modern, confident. And yet, something essential had been lost. The question was no longer whether Penn Station would return. It was whether the city would ever build something like it again. But what if Penn Station had been saved? Imagine a different decision at the moment of its greatest vulnerability. A future where preservation was not seen as resistance to progress, but as its foundation. In this version of New York, Penn Station never disappears. Instead, it evolves. Inside the terminal, people move once again through monumental space. The architecture remains unmistakable, classical, and generous, yet fully alive. The station is not frozen in time. It is active, functional, and contemporary. Outside, the original limestone facade still defines the block. Restored rather than neglected, it stands confidently as the city grows around it. Glass towers rise nearby. Traffic intensifies. New York changes. And Penn Station changes with it, without surrendering its identity. In daylight, the facade feels vibrant and modern, its classical proportions sharpened by careful restoration. By night, it glows once again, not as nostalgia, but as a working part of the city's daily rhythm. Inside, the great concourse remains crowned by its soaring steel and glass roof. Natural light pours down as it once did, now paired with modern departure boards, digital signage, and contemporary amenities. The space hums with activity. Penn Station reclaims its role as the beating heart of the city. Below, modern trains glide through the station, their movement framed by architecture designed for scale rather than compression. LED boards replace paper schedules. Information is clear, legible, and intuitive. The experience is efficient without being diminished. At platform level, the contrast is striking. Passengers wait beneath the original vaulted roof, a dramatic expanse of glass and steel overhead. Advertisements and signage are present, but restrained. The ceiling remains high. The air feels open. Arrival and departure are no longer reduced to corridors underground. From the concourse, travellers move easily between levels. Kiosks, retail, and services are integrated without overwhelming the space. The station feels busy, but never claustrophobic. In this alternate present, Penn Station is not a relic. It is proof that historic infrastructure can adapt, that civic architecture can absorb new technology without losing its soul, that preservation and modernization do not have to be opposites. Some of the imagery you are seeing here has been recreated or enhanced using AI, carefully modeled on the original station's design, not as fantasy, but as a question. What if New York had chosen to build forward without tearing down? Now consider a different hypothetical. Not preservation and not total erasure, but something in between. In this version of history, Penn Station is partially dismantled but not entirely lost. The great head house is opened at its centre. The monumental facades remain. From above, the change is immediate. The heart of the station is removed to make room for Madison Square Garden, while the limestone perimeter stays intact, holding the edge of the block as it always had. As construction continues, steel rises behind the preserved stone. Old and new exist simultaneously, not in harmony, but in tension. The city does not choose between memory and progress. It chooses both. By 1968, the new complex is complete. Madison Square Garden stands at the center, while the original Penn Station facade becomes the ceremonial entrance to both the arena and the rail terminal below. A glass roof bridges the gap between past and present, allowing light to pass through where walls once stood. The result is unconventional, neither fully classical nor fully modern, a building that reveals its history rather than hiding it. Decades later, the hybrid evolves. By 2025, the complex has been renovated and refined, becoming one of the most unusual arenas in the world. A stadium entered through Beaux-Arts stone halls, a transit hub framed by architecture from another century. At street level, the experience is unmistakable. The original Penn Station facade still stands proud, anchoring the block, while Madison Square Garden rises behind it, unapologetically modern. Inside, historic corridors transition into contemporary space, guiding visitors from stone to steel, from past to present. This version of Penn Station is not a restoration, and it is not a loss. It is a compromise, a reminder that cities are rarely built from pure ideals, but from layered decisions, and that sometimes the most revealing futures are the ones that refuse to choose a single answer. Old Penn Station no longer stands, but the questions it raised still shape our cities. What we preserve, what we replace, and what we choose to imagine instead. If you're interested in stories like this, lost places, alternate histories, and the futures our cities never saw, subscribe to our Catalyst Lab. There are many more cities to explore.